Tommy, the Razor Rainone.
Make sure y'all stay on point with the Puncher's Point. What is good, y'all? Welcome back to the Puncher's Point. It's been a minute since we've done an interview on here. Me personally, I love interviews on the Puncher's Point because I get to interview fighters. I get to get their insight on what they experienced throughout their career and overall how they approach boxing, throughout the mindset, the physical part of it, all that type of stuff. And I wanted to interview a boxer, and this guy, he's like the feel in my posts. I'm a big fan of his work. Him and Paulie Malignaggi, they got themselves a podcast, the Big Fight Forecast. So, ladies and gentlemen, former title challenger, 26-8, never been knocked out, never been knocked down in his career. Ladies and gentlemen, Tommy the Razor Rainone. Tommy, appreciate you coming out to the podcast. How you doing, man?
Good. I'm good. Running around all day now. I'm watching the fights on DAZN actually as I'm talking to you. Trying to win a little bit. I got my podcast. Be better. So anything that I call on my podcast, I got to throw a few dollars on.
Oh yeah, for sure. Got to get those bets in. So, overall, before we start the whole interview, what fights you watch on DAZN? What's caught your eye?
The show in Mexico. It's a small show. Tomorrow there's one in the UK in the early afternoon, which is a bigger show. Tomorrow is Ball versus Figueroa. That's early afternoon. So that's a top.
Oh yeah, no, Ball versus Figueroa. I expect there to be fireworks for that one for sure, especially what's going on in those later divisions, because all the later divisions, they got to be shaken up. And we're going to talk about some of these fights coming up and all that type of stuff towards the later part of the podcast. But let's get this interview going, man. So first thing I wanted to say is you had yourself a good boxing career, 26-8, never been knocked out, never been knocked down. You had your Madison Square Garden moment. You fought guys who were former world champions, all those types of things. So I guess the question that I have for you is, where did this all start? Like, where did this whole boxing journey start for you? Was there an influence as far as a certain fighter or a certain fight? What got you into the sport of boxing?
It was a combination of things. I started a lot later than I would have liked to. So I saw Rocky when I was probably around like 6 years old. It was probably like Rocky 2 or 3 at that point, actually. And I was always into WWF wrestling, like obsessed. I was also, the absolute peak of the WWF wrestling at that point was when Hulk Hogan was on top of the world. I was watching on a regular basis. So on some level as a kid, 6, 7 years old, I knew that wrestling wasn't real. I didn't know like that it was scripted per se, but I just knew that it wasn't real. And then I came across, I watched the Rocky movies and obviously knew that was cinema. And then I saw Mike Tyson fight. I was probably at this point, probably like 8 years old. And then I realized that's kind of like a combination of everything. That's a combination of the movies that I watch and the wrestling that I watch. And this is like the real thing. And I wanted to box. And you're talking about like 1988. We're far away from the internet. You got to look in a phone book to like maybe find a boxing gym. And there aren't a lot of them. So I remember looking through the yellow pages and finding boxing gyms. And my mother would tell me, no, that's too far. That's like an hour away. And any excuse she could come up with to kind of, push me away from it. Because I played baseball, and most parents aren't going to push their child in the direction of a violent sport, right? Even if it's football, they kept me away from football too. And they just figured, I guess, it was a phase that would go away, and it never went away. So year after year after year, I started getting into the sport, and now I'm like 10 years old. It's 1990 or so, and I'm watching regular fights on HBO and CBS. And I'm watching Terry Norris, and I'm watching Chavez, and I'm watching Tyson, Holyfield, and George Foreman on his comeback. So I'm trying to watch these fights and get into the sport. And I really wanted to do it, but it was just a matter of getting to a gym. And it didn't happen until I was 17 years old and I had some actual independence in my life. I didn't even have a car yet when I first started, but I found out where a boxing gym was close to the neighborhood that I moved to. And then my buddy went to the gym. I was 17 years old, and we both went the same day. And I came back the next day, and he never came back. And that was it. And I never stopped boxing. That was it. From there on, I was, but I do wish that I started a lot younger.
And it's crazy that you talked about how there weren't too many boxing gyms in Long Island, because when you talk about Long Island is a very popular place in New York. But when I was doing the research as far as like fighters from Long Island, specifically before your time, there weren't many. Like there weren't a lot of boxers from Long Island necessarily. New York's got like a plethora of them, but when I was doing the research as far as like Long Island, I couldn't find too many boxers before then. So I guess
it was a decent amount, but I'm not sure. Where are you from?
I'm from Rhode Island.
You're from Rhode Island. So now, if if I was looking into Rhode Island, I wouldn't know how to look into specific regions of Rhode Island or specific towns and things of that nature. So if you're just going to Google Long Island, you're going to have more of an issue finding it. If you're looking up specific towns, Farmingdale, Hempstead, etc., you'll be able to pinpoint a little more. So there are a million towns on Long Island. Long Island's far bigger than Long Island's bigger than I think something like 20 some odd states in America. So Long Island's huge. So in the 80s, you had obvious ones like Buddy McGirt was the first world champion from Long Island. Jerry Cooney obviously was a superstar. But then you have guys like Johnny and Eddie Davis who were both fought for the world title against Michael Spinks. All right. Then you had Howard Davis, who won an Olympic gold medal. He's from Glen Cove. So if you're specifically, you'd have to look up towns. So you're not going to recognize if you see Glen Cove, New York, you're not automatically going to associate that with Long Island. Or Brentwood, Long Island, Brentwood, New York, you're not automatically going to associate that with Long Island. But that was where Buddy McGirt was from, or Jerry Cooney's from Huntington, Long Island. But it's going to say when you look it up on BoxRec, it's say Huntington, New York. It's going to say Brentwood, New York. There were a fair amount of fighters, though. There was a decent amount of fighters throughout the 70s, 80s, and then the 90s, a lot more. The last, maybe I would say 10 to 15 years, though, there's been a lot more guys like Joe Smith, like Chris Algieri, Patrick Day, Cletus Selden. There's been a lot more guys that have been coming out of Long Island that have been making some noise and getting on TV and getting in some big fights.
Yeah, I was gonna say the guys later after you, like Joe Smith and the ones that you mentioned, those are the ones that were popping up. I did see Buddy McGirt. That was definitely like the one that popped my eye. I wanted to ask you, being from Long Island, obviously you said Mike Tyson like brought you was the one that kind of influenced you as far as like real actual boxers. But out of the Long Island boxers that you mentioned, was there one specific that you kind of like hooked on a little bit that probably you took a style or you kind of took an influence to?
Yeah, two specifically, and I trained with both of them. Right before I started boxing, I had written an article in Newsday, which is our newspaper over here. It was about a boxer named Willie Wise, whose son had epilepsy and seizures on a regular basis. And he was at the airport. He was about to leave for a training camp with Pernell Whitaker, and then he had to rush home because his son had another seizure, and they had to rush him to the hospital. And it was a long article about Willie Wise. At the time, I believe he was something in the ballpark of 23 wins and maybe 3 losses. And said they trained at a gym on Westbury, Long Island on Post Avenue. And that's the gym that I went to literally like the next week. So I walked into the gym and I started training over there. Maybe on the second or third day, Willie came walking in and I'm like, oh, holy shit, that's the guy that I read about in the newspaper. So that was, the first real pro fighter that I met. And Willie would go on to have a pretty decent career. He beat Julio Cesar Chavez in the ring upset of the year in 1999. He beat 3 or 4 world champions. He beat Digon Tabella. He beat Jose Luis Ramirez, who's from he's from Connecticut or Rhode Island. He's from New England. He won a world title at 154 pounds. Willie was the first one to beat him. So to answer your question, yeah, Willie was, a local guy, and he was in his prime at that point and had these big fights coming up. And when I first started training at the gym, he was getting ready for a fight on, this is when they still had Tuesday night fights on USA Network. And he was getting ready for a fight for the NABF title with Darrell Corley. And if you look that fight up, Corley, after that fight, would go on to fight Oscar De La Hoya for the world title. But if you watch the fight where he fought Willie for the NABF title, he wins a split decision over Willie, and there's no way he beat him. They just gave him the fight. Close fight. Obviously, the A-side fighter is going to get it. The house fighter is going to get it. But Willie could fight. And the second one would be Jake Rodriguez, who was a world champion, who's from Long Island. And I had seen him fight on TV when I was younger. I saw him fight Pernell Whitaker. I saw him fight on ESPN a few times. I had no idea he trained at my gym. And then one day I was in the pads of my trainer, and he came walking in with a big black eye. He had just gotten back from a fight in Denmark, which was ultimately the last pro fight of his career. And I'm like, looking, I'm like, holy shit, is that Jake the Snake Rodriguez? And he says, yeah, that's Jake. So those two guys, you could look up to superstars like Chavez and Tyson and these huge monumental figures. But for me, Willie and Jake in a weird way were like my mom, because it was reality to me. You know what I mean? Like, these were guys that I saw fight on TV, and now they're right in front of me. So those are the first couple of pro fighters I ever met. And then ultimately later on in my career, Jake would end up being my assistant trainer. For probably about 10 or 11 fights in my career, I became good friends with him. And Willie I still stay in touch with. He moved out to Virginia. But those two, I would say, were very influential on me.
Oh yeah, for sure. And a lot of people, like you said, they look at like the huge superstars, the Tysons and the Chavezes, but the local fighters, like, they got more of an impact than people think. For me, like, growing up in Rhode Island, I never got to meet Vinny Paz, but Vinny Paz would be like the one that everybody talks about. For me, when I was like a kid, my parents, they were close. I don't know if you know who he is, but they were close to Peter Manfredo. and Gary Belletto. Those were like the two local ones that a lot of the people that grew up in Rhode Island, like around like that Providence, Cranston area, like those were the guys that you would look up to. And just like knowing like Peter Manfredo, I got to go by his gym when I was like a little kid. You know, he knew my family very, very well, always treated me nice. So those local fighters definitely got a big impact on how people get interested in the sport, because some of us, we're not going to have the opportunity to go meet a Mike Tyson or a Julio Cesar Chavez. So it's all about those local fighters, and it's all about the type of connection that you build with them. Now, with all of that being said, I want to kind of dive into your career a little bit. So you had yourself a great career. Now I probably know the answer, but I don't want to go and assume. Was there a specific moment in your professional or amateur career that you highlight the most as far as the most memorable?
You know, that's a tricky question, actually. I mean, I have a lot of good memories. I obviously have a lot of things that that I wish went differently. I would honestly one thing that one of the most important thing about a person's career is actually how it starts. So I would actually say my pro debut, as crazy as that sounds. All right.
Okay.
Pro debut was something that I dreamed about my whole life, and it didn't happen until I was nearly 27 years old. So I was 26 years and 8 months old when I made my pro debut, which is a little bit old in the game. And it seemed like it was never going to happen either, because I had like 3-4 fights in a row fall out. I was supposed to make my pro debut in Rochester. The whole show fell off. Then I was supposed to make my debut in Jersey, and that fell through. And then finally it happened on Long Island, and it happened pretty quick, actually. And I got myself in great shape, and I had not fought in 3.5 years. So I had stopped boxing at 23 years old and taken like a 3-year break. It was supposed to be a year break, just to go and have fun and travel and do my thing with my friends. And I was cutting too many corners in boxing and having too much fun, cutting too many corners in boxing, having too much fun outside of the ring. And then 1 year turns into 2, and two turns into 3. It's kind of like saying, like, I'm going to take a year off from school and then I'm going to go back, and then you never go back. And none of my friends thought I was going to start boxing again, go back to boxing. And then 3 years passed, and then I started. It was like starting from scratch. It really was. It was horrible, because I mean, I hadn't been to a gym in 3 years. I've been just having way too much fun. And then I started again at 26 years old, and started doing things that I didn't do in the amateurs. I never ran once in the amateurs. Never ran, never jumped rope, never hit a speed bag. I would just go to the gym and want to spar, anybody and everybody. And I'd hit the pads, hit the bed, and that was about it. Now I was going out, I was running 3-4 miles a day, every day, doing sprints, started to jump rope, started to hit a speed bag, actually starting to do like real boxing workouts, right? And then so I would say the pro debut, because I worked super hard for it. I was very motivated. And listen, you got to win your pro debut, or else, you're off to a bad start, and B, that's really going to mess with your self-confidence, because I had, in the amateurs, a lot more politics in the amateurs than there are on the pros. So I had a few decisions not go my way in the amateurs that would have got me nationally ranked, that would have been very good wins in my career, that didn't happen. And it messed with my self-confidence a little bit. So to lose my pro debut would not have been a good, that would have probably brought me right back to where I used to be. So winning the pro debut is the most important thing to get things going. So, long-winded answer to your question is, winning the pro debut was one of the more important moments of my career. But there are several. But I mean, that one I always say comes first and foremost, because nothing else happens without winning that pro debut.
I'm glad I didn't assume, because I was going to guess the Madison Square Garden, like the headline card. And as I was doing a little bit of research into it, I didn't know that was Rock Nation's first boxing event that they set up. Like, I was looking up the article. That was Rock Nation's first event, and you were the headline of it. And the guy, correct me if I'm wrong, the guy you faced, he ended up retiring undefeated. I don't think he lost, that Hernandez guy.
Yeah, unfortunately, had a lot of problems outside of the ring. I think he got himself up to like 37-0, and he never really stepped up to that next level, because he started getting in trouble with the law. And unfortunately, his father, Buddy, who I had developed a relationship with, a friendship, after I fought his son, he ended up getting killed in D.C. He got shot and killed. And I think, Dusty just had a lot of problems outside of the ring. And he's only 30 years old now, which is wild, because, I mean, we fought in 2015. He was 20 years old when we fought. But he was never able to really get it all together, and things just kept happening. But that was interesting, because they offered me the fight with him probably like 3 months earlier on a Golovkin card at Madison Square Garden, and I turned it down. Because there's no TV involved. So they wanted me to fight him, and it would have been cool to fight on a Golovkin undercard and all, but I said, if I'm going to fight this guy, you want me to fight a guy that, whatever he was at the time, 23-0, 24-0. I'm fighting a guy that's 23-0 off TV. regardless. And the matchmaker said, you don't want to hear how much money is involved. I said, no, I don't really care, because who's going to see it? So holding out on that actually worked out, because it ended up within like 3 months, I got offered the fight with him again. And this time it was the main event at Madison Square Garden. It was on Fox Sports. It got a ton of attention and promotion. So, that one was pretty cool. Obviously I wish the result would have been different, but I had it stacked against me in that one. I'm fighting a very good fighter who's 15 years younger than me, and they just signed him. Rock Nation had just signed him, so it was a tough task. But you know what, it's one of those losses that I'm actually proud of, because I never stopped trying to win in that fight. I just couldn't figure out a way to do it.
Right. And and overall, I feel like in general, just saying I got to headline Madison Square Garden, like that's the mecca of boxing, regardless of what level you're on, regardless of anything like that. If you're the main event for Madison Square Garden, I think that's a big feat in itself. The thing I wanted to ask you about that was, as I was looking through the article, it said that there were like performances to be announced, things like that, kind of get into the entertainment side of Rock Nation. First, kind of like a two-part question. What did you remember like vividly about Madison Square Garden before the fight, like during the event, and overall, as far as like the entertainment aspect, as far as like the performances that they said they were talking about? What do you remember the most about that event?
I'll tell you, there's some cool things about it, but there's a drawback to being a main event too. So this was my third time fighting at the Garden. So fighting at the Garden, and this goes back to one of your earlier question when I was just talking about the per debut. But fighting at the Garden the first time when I did in 2010, that was like the real dream. My whole life was to fight at Madison Square Garden, and I fought at the Garden twice before I got to main event before I got to main event at Madison Square Garden. The cool thing about fighting on the undercard is after you fight, you take a quick shower, come out, watch the rest of the fights, watch the co-main event, watch the main event, walk around, hang out with your family and friends, and meet people. You can't do that when you fight in the main event. So I didn't get to go out there and meet Rosie Perez and Jay-Z and Jake Gyllenhaal and all these people that were sitting there in the front row, CC Sebastian, all these famous people. I didn't get to meet any of them, because once the fight's over, they all leave. So as far as the performers go, I think Fabulous performed right before I fought. I'm not into rap. I never was, but I know that I was sitting there looking on the screen. He was performing in the ring right before we fought. And I forget who sang the national anthem. It was somebody of importance. But yeah, I never even got to meet Jay-Z, believe it or not. Again, because when you're the main event, you really, you're in the dressing room all night. Had I fought, in the co-main event, or had I fought earlier on the card, as soon as the fight's over, I'm out and about hanging out with everybody and meeting everybody. But when you're in the main event, you're kind of locked up in a room in the back.
It's crazy because Rock Nation are kind of ahead of their time, because if you look at like Saudi Arabia, in like the ring, if you look at like Crawford and Madrimov, you looked at like I believe it was Joshua and Dubois, like they had like the big performance like before the fight and everything like that. They were kind of ahead of its time, because you don't necessarily remember, me personally, I don't necessarily remember any big performances before a fight or anything like that. So like Rock Nation setting that up,
Yeah,
it's kind of a big deal.
The one that I remember, I don't know how old you are, but I know that I was probably about 21, 22. So this would have been 2001, 2002. HBO had a show called KO Nation. And Kevin Kelly, who's a friend of mine, was one of the commentators. He was one of the commentators along with Ed Lover from MTV. And they had that rap and boxing like aspect to it. And it did good ratings, and it was an afternoon show, actually. It was usually on in the afternoons on a Saturday, maybe like every other month. And for whatever reason, I guess the ratings fell off. And after a year or so, that was that for KO Nation. But I think KO Nation might have been the first one to try and implement that. And then obviously, Jay-Z tried to take it to the next level. And, I think he had a good ideas in the beginning. He signed Miguel Cotto. He signed Andre Ward. He was putting on big shows. But I think that, I just don't think he had boxing people involved with him. You need boxing people. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much money. 50 got involved with boxing for a little while. He was doing some co-promotions with Lutabella in New York City. At the end of the day, you have to be involved with boxing people as your matchmakers, as your right and left-hand men, and things of that nature. So I think he was just burning through too much money.
Oh yeah, 1000%. And even recently, when I was waiting to do like the Dubois and Joshua, or like the Crawford and Madrimov, by the time those fights are on, it's like 10, 11 o'clock p.m. You got Oasis performing, Eminem. At this point, I'm like, look, I like me some Eminem. Oasis is cool and all, but like, we need to get to this fight, because I ain't gonna be able to record until 1 a.m. So we got to like wrap this thing along. So I feel like performance wise, it's a lot more trickier with boxing than other sports. But regardless of all of that, I do want to also shift to when you retired in 2018. You retired in 2018. The last 2 fights that you had, they were draws. What was the biggest factor into you retiring? Was it something physical, mental? Was it like something personal, like a family event, anything like that? What was the main reason for retiring when you did? I know you started late. That might also have a factor into it, but what would you say would be like the biggest factor into saying, you know what, time to hang up the gloves?
There were a few different reasons. I mean, number one, I was 38 years old, so sports have a shelf life. In boxing, the difference between boxing and baseball is, in baseball, Derek Jeter's not catching up to the fastball, and instead of driving it into deep center, he's popping out to short. Right? In boxing, you're getting your brain cells knocked out. So
Right.
wrong in boxing. So I felt myself starting to slip a little bit. There's an old expression that the fighter is the first to know it and the last one to admit it. And I can tell you that is absolute truth. So all of a sudden I started having some trouble making weight. I noticed my body was changing a little bit as far as just my muscle tone. I wasn't getting as shredded and ripped, getting ready for fights. Getting hit in the gym a little bit more because I was a pretty slick guy. I didn't get marked up a lot. I was starting to get marked up a lot more because the elasticity of your skin starts to go as you get older. So I was starting to bruise up in the gym a little more with sparring. So a few things like that. Everything became a little bit hard. The training session started to get a little harder. Making weight definitely got a lot harder. So the writing was kind of on the wall. And let's see, I fought at Nassau Coliseum, and I was supposed to DiBello. I'm going to deal with Lou DiBello where basically I was going to fight twice. He wanted me to fight. He had an undisputed prospect from Brooklyn by way of Ireland. I think the kid was 10 or 11 at the time. He wanted me to fight him on the Nassau Coliseum show. And I said, listen, Lou, I said, I have no issue fighting your guy, but I'm coming off a 10-month layoff, I think it was at the time. And that 10-month layoff, I had a first-round knockout. A first-round knockout looks great on paper, but it doesn't do anything for you. It doesn't improve you as a fighter. So I got one round in like the last 15 months, right? So I said, put me on your show. Let me just shed the rust, and I promise you, I'll fight him immediately afterwards. I give you my word. And it took a lot of back and forth with me and him, and I had to have one of my buddies get involved. That's a personal friend of his, and eventually he relented and he put me on the card. And I told him, like, as a man, I'll absolutely let me get rid of this guy. Let me shed the rust, and I'll come back and I'll fight your guy on the next Nassau Coliseum show or at Barclays or wherever you want me to fight him. And again, I had just at this point I'm 37 years old, so I'm getting ready for this Nassau Coliseum fight, and literally a week at the training camp, my trainer Jorge cuts his hand open at work, and he has to get like 47 stitches. So there goes pad work. So that's out of the question. So now I have to be a little more reliant on my assistant trainer, Chris, who's a correction officer at a jail in Brooklyn. And he gets into a scuffle with one of the inmates, and he hits the ground with him, and he dislocates his shoulder. So I got both of my trainers out of commission, right? So now I'm pretty much training myself for that fight. I'm doing bullshit sparring. So I'm banking a lot of rounds, but it's quantity over quality. I'm not, because when you're not being pushed and forced the same way, you're not being trained. You're gonna get a little complacent. And that's what happened getting ready for that fight. But also, what was happening without me really realizing it is my body was changing. So now, I'm leaving the gym and I'm getting on the scale and I'm like, shit. I got to make 100. And I think that one was at 151 pounds, and I'm leaving the gym and I'm like 164. I'm like, all right, the weight will come off next week. And every week we're passing, the weights come off very slowly. So the morning of the weigh-in, the way I cut weight is I go to the gym. If the fight's on a Saturday, the weigh-in's on Friday. So Thursday night Thursday afternoon I'll have my last meal, drink a little bit of water, and that's it. Now when I go to the gym, I'll shadow box 8-9 rounds, jump rope 3-4 rounds. Sweat real good, drink absolutely nothing, come home, shower, go to sleep. And then when I wake up, I hit the sauna and I take off like the remaining usually 2 or 3 pounds that I have to take off. When I left the gym after doing my usual routine, I get on the scale and I got to be 150 the next day. And I'm 161 pounds. I'm like, oh shit, how did this happen? I wake up the next morning and I'm about 160 now. So I have 10 pounds to take off, or 9 pounds, I should say. I have 9 pounds to take off before the weigh-in. I go to the sauna and I actually passed out twice. All right. I mean, I was absolutely dying in the sauna. And I specifically remember coming out and I was laying on a bench And I text my buddy Brendan, and he's going to meet me at the weigh-in. And I said, dude, I've never had to do this before. I'm going to probably have to hit up the matchmaker and like renegotiate the contract. I'm not going to be able to make weight. And he's like, how's that work? I'm like, I'll have them change the weight to like 154, maybe 155, and I'll have to give up, a certain amount of my purse. And he's just like, all right. So then the fighter in me is like, no, I'm not giving up any money for anybody. And I kept going back in the sauna and going on the scale. And then eventually I made weight. Eventually I got on the scale and I'm like, whew, 151, I did it. And I took a picture of myself when I got in the car. I looked like Skeletor from He-Man. Like, I mean, the bones were popping out of my face. And I get to the weigh-in. And the first person I see is Bobby Cassidy, who works for Newsday, who's a good friend of mine. He's like, hey, Tommy, I want to get interviewed after the weigh-in. And it looks so good. I was like, nah, Bobby, I always look like this at weigh-ins. Are you sure? I'm like, yeah, I had a little trouble making weight, but it's all good. 2 minutes later, I see Sean Monahan, who's fighting in the main event against Marcus Brown. And Sean's like, dude, you don't look good at all. And I'm like, thanks, Sean. So I got on the scale, whatever. Do an interview with Bobby. And then I go out to eat with my friends across the street at this Italian place, Morelli's. And as soon as we walked in there, I drank. But before my meal even came, I sucked down. I'm talking like one sip. I sucked down like 5 seltzers in a row. And then I moved on to soda. By the time I finished eating my meal, I got a picture. It's actually on my hard drive. I wish I could share it with you now. I can't even. But there were like 17 empty cups, like all over the table. That's how dehydrated and dead I was. So anyway, I go home that night, and Bobby posts a video on Newsday.com and sends me a link. And when I looked at it, you see yourself in the mirror. You see yourself 24 hours a day. We're used to seeing ourselves. I'm used to seeing myself, what I look like when I'm cutting weight and everything. It all looks the same to me. And I see this picture of me on Newsday, and I looked at him like, oh my God, I do look like shit. Like I couldn't believe it. I looked so sucked out and dried out, no muscle tone, just my face was dead, my skin was pale. So P.S., I go out there the next night, and in the first round and a half, I was in complete control. And then it was like a switch went off. I just had nothing from there on out. And I crawled to the finish line. I honestly thought, to this day, I always felt that I did just enough to win the fight. It would have been a very ugly win. It was a terrible performance. I got tired. The guy that I was in there with, he had fought for the world title. He could punch. He wasn't very skilled. He could punch. I was certainly feeling the punches that night. But I thought I did enough to win, honestly. And I didn't get the win. And after that, I was pretty much kind of in retirement mode in my head. I'm like, you know what? I can't make weight anymore. I just blew it at Nassau Coliseum, where I could have beat this guy and went on to fight Lou's guy, Ludabella's guy, who, whatever he was. I mean, he was 10 or 11-0 at the time, but he wasn't a big puncher. Even if he was to beat me, I would have got a good opportunity. I would have got a good payday, and I think I would have gave a good account of myself, because I would have had a proper training camp with both my trainers back, in commission. But any which way, it went how it went. And then maybe about a month later, I got a call actually from Paulie, and Paulie's manager was looking for some fighters for the next show at Nassau Coliseum, and they put me on that one. And for the second fight at Nassau, I had a much better training camp. I had both of my trainers back. I got great sparring. I didn't get complacent. It wasn't quantity over quality. It was quality sparring with good fighters like Tyrone James, tall, long southpaws, lefties, righties, would go to different gyms, did everything I needed to do to get ready for that fight. And I still had all kinds of trouble making weight for the fight. I was dying in the sauna again. And I went out there, and I fought a much better, more disciplined fight. And you know what? I wasn't the same guy anymore. I just realized I just wasn't the same guy. You lose a little bit of speed. You lose a little bit of power. You lose a little bit of endurance. Your punch resistance starts to slip just a little bit, because remember, when you're making weight, when you're really pushing to make weight, it affects your punch resistance. So I had never been down in my career, but those 2 fights at Nassau Coliseum, those back-to-back fights, I've never been rocked like that in my life. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I couldn't make weight anymore. So the writing was on the wall. And then there was one more after that where I fought in Atlantic City to a draw. And so the writing was on the wall. And the Atlantic City fight, they had gotten me basically the perfect opponent, where I didn't think I was going to stop the guy, but I figured he was a guy that I would shut out 8 rounds to nothing. At the worst, I beat him 6-2. And I went out there right before the fight. And this isn't bullshit. This is going to sound like an excuse, but it's not. Right before the fight, once I get to Atlantic City, I started getting sick. All right. So I felt like a scratch in my throat. And bottom line is, by the time I got to the weigh-in, I never left my hotel room besides the weigh-in. I had a stuffy nose. I'm spitting up like green. I had a chest infection is basically what it comes down to. So I just stayed off my feet, stayed in my room the entire time. And And I figured, you know what, I'll go out there. I can handle this guy. No problem. I'm still in shape. And I went out there. And once you tell yourself and you're already worried about getting tired and you're paranoid about getting tired, guess what happens? You get tired.
Get tired.
Out there, and this guy never landed a punch on me. I swear to me, 8 rounds, this guy never landed a shot. And the problem was in that fight that I was exhausted by the third round, and then it hurt my rib. He kept not rabbit punching me, hitting me like when you hit on the side in a clinch. The shots don't hurt. You don't feel those shots. There's not much on them. And all of a sudden in the fifth round, I got off the stool coming after the fifth round, and like I stretched and I'm like, shit, what's wrong with my side over here? And he hit me with a little shot over there. And I was worried that I broke a rib. So now I'm not using my left hand for the rest of the fight because I was protecting the left side. And I was worried that I broke a rib. So the combination of A, I was already tired, and B, I'm worried about my rib injury. I didn't have a lot of output that night. But this guy could not lay a glove on me. So I was touching with the jab and countering with hooks and uppercuts, mostly lead hand stuff. And I thought I still won the fight 6-2, quite honestly. But when I went back and I watched the video a couple of times, I could see where they gave him some rounds. But the bottom line is, that's when I knew it was time to retire, because that was 3 fights in a row where shit was just going wrong. Because you got to realize when you're getting ready for a fight, you're punishing your body day in and day out. All right. So fighters are far more susceptible to getting sick than the average person, because we're dealing with the elements. We're out running in 4-degree weather sometimes, or we're out running when it's 95 degrees in the summer, and we're doing this. And then we're in the gym, we're running, we're constantly just destroying our bodies. Right. And you recover, you get out there, you go and you fight. And when I was younger, I would never get sick. And all of a sudden now I'm like, all right, this is 3 fights in a row that I had trouble making weight. Now I'm getting sick before the fights. Like just everything's kind of pointing in a certain direction, right? So I knew it was kind of time to wrap it up. And then honestly, what happened is then next thing was the pandemic. And the pandemic that was that. I was still training with the hope of fighting one more time. Real Deal event, Holyfield Real Deal Promotions started a promotional company in New York, which I started commentating for. And I was supposed to fight in April of 2019 was going to be my last fight for them. And what happens in the gym sparring, getting ready, I get hit with an elbow and I get cut and I had to pull out of the fight. And just sign after sign after sign. So sometimes no closure is closure. Like, things could have probably not gone my way and gone horribly wrong. Who knows? But, it sucks. And that's what you think about the end a lot. I think about those last like 3 fights and, the ending of my career a lot, because I wasn't the same person anymore. I was doing a lot of the things that I've always done to get ready, and my diet was better and I was being wiser and smarter, but just, you get older, things change.
That's a crazy weight story. So you down just 17 cups in general, like at a restaurant after a weigh-in? Was that what it was?
That's 12. Yeah, 12. I went from
12?
I couldn't even talk. Like I literally couldn't talk. Like I had no voice. So I got to the weigh-in and I was talking like that. So we got to the restaurant, and my buddy explained to the waiter, like, listen, he just made weight across the street. He just lost like 9 pounds in an hour. You got to bring him like a lot of fluids, get him like sodas and seltzers and everything. So by the time we even ordered the meal, I had sucked down like 5 seltzers and sodas already. And I just kept going and going. And I'm talking about like big ice glasses. 1 sip, gone. Next. I was so dehydrated. I was so dead. But again, I mean, that fight, the first one at Nassau, as I said, both of my trainers had these wild injuries right before the fight. So both of them really weren't in the gym, and I had to use random people on the pads that I wasn't comfortable with, and I wasn't going to other gyms and getting sparring, and I got complacent. And I didn't train right for that fight, which all led to the weight problems, led to the big weight problems that I had getting ready for that fight. So when I got the opportunity to fight at Nassau a second time, and I'm saying to myself, wow, this is an opportunity for me to make all the wrong things right. And I was actually supposed to rematch Monterosa, the guy that I lost to, and he pulled out like a week before the fight over money issues. So I ended up having to fight somebody else. But for that second one in Nassau, I did everything correct. I dieted right. I trained right. I was going to different gyms and getting sparring. I got both of my trainers right. And you know what? For all that I did right, maybe everything might have got maybe 15% better. Like 15% easier. Making the weight became just a little bit easier. The sparring was only a little. So, I mean, there were signs everywhere. Things just got a lot harder. Once you hit, my thing is this, and I actually use it as a betting strategy for my show as well. The magic number for me in boxing is 37. That's when Floyd Mayweather retired, by the way. So he fought Berto and then he retired. At 36, I still felt great. I still had no trouble making weight. the energy level, everything was still there. Once I hit 37, it was like a switch went off, and I just wasn't the same guy anymore. And if you really take a good look at certain careers, a majority of careers, once you hit that 36, 37 mark, there are very, very, very rare exceptions to good things happen to fighters after the age of 37. Very rarely. Usyk right now is an example. He's a very rare example, an exception to the rule.
What about Crawford? Is Crawford 37?
38, that's why he retired.
38, yep, there we go. So I was gonna wait a little bit to ask this question, but I figure like now is the perfect time. So after you retired, we'll get to like the whole post boxing career after that. But the question I have is when you see these guys and they hop on the scale and they miss weight by like 4 or 5 pounds, or like for instance like Kermel Moton, like he missed like 10 in one fight. Do you look at, because a lot of the fans, like a lot of the regular fans that like they don't fight like me and a lot of other people will look and be like, that's undisciplined. Can you tell by somebody being on that scale when they miss weight? Can you tell whether it's something like not disciplined or whether you know it's like a legit health issue? Like, could you differentiate the two, or for you it's always you got to make weight no matter what?
Gotta make weight. That's it. You sign a contract, you got to make weight, and that's it. And you know what? Maybe if you murder yourself, all right, and you miss weight by a pound or a pound and a half, which is still a lot. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. You have weeks to prepare for this. You know that you have to be a certain weight. You know what? Then I can forgive you. But when you're a guy like a Hector Camacho Jr. who misses weight 8 or 9 times in your career, and it's a constant thing. Jose Luis Castillo used to miss weight all the time in his career. Certain guys just that. And when you're missing weight by 4, 5, 7, 8 pounds, that's insane to me. That's absolutely insane. Because your first job, you got to beat the scale before you have the opportunity to beat your opponent. And as I said, the first time, when I fought at Nassau, I wasn't. It might have only been $2,000 or $3,000. I'm not giving away free money. I was gonna make. Yeah, there's just the fighter in me is just like, no, I'm gonna make weight. In retrospect, I kind of wish I did. Like, hey, you know what? I'm really dying over here. How can we make this fight at 154 instead of 151? Because those 3 pounds could have really helped me. But just the fighter in me said, no, I'm not going to quit like that. I feel like me not making weight is me quitting on myself and quitting on the fight before I even get in the ring.
Last question before we get on to the next topic. So like one of them that like keeps sticking into my mind is like the Ryan Garcia Devin Haney one, where he comes in and he goes over 3 pounds, and a lot of people think like that's like it's like a little like it's like a little like strategy that he had. Do you think it was him undisciplined missing weight, or do you think there was actually like a madness behind? Like, do you think there was actually like a strategy behind like the madness that he was doing?
I don't know. I wasn't in his camp, but I don't think he was prepared for that fight personally. And you know what? Listen, you're talking about 3 pounds as a strategy, but the strategy is now it's going to cost you $1 million, and you don't get to win a world title. So even if you win the fight, you're not the champ. And Ryan Garcia still has never won a world title. So it's a pretty shitty strategy if your strategy is to not to become a world champion. I think Ryan was just very undisciplined. I think he went through the motions in camp. I think that maybe he did what he had to do at the very last second to try and do a crash diet, and it didn't work.
That's fair enough. Now, I do want to get to your career after boxing. You talked about, being a writer, doing some commentary while you were still boxing, and then obviously retire in 2018, and it kind of turns into like more of like a main job type of thing, and you're still doing like relatively, maybe not in the physical part, but as far as like the mental and as far as like you're still going to like different places, commentating on fights, you're still traveling, doing all those types of things. But I want to talk about like the shift from being like a full-time fighter and maybe doing that like part-time to shifting into basically like, okay, this is now like the next phase of my life. I'm commentating now. I'm writing now full-time, stuff like that. Did you see kind of like a big shift as far as like how you had to prepare like mentally, or as far as what you had to do to prepare to be the best you can possibly be come fight night behind the table opposed to like in the ring? Did you see some type of shift?
Well, there's preparation that has to be involved in everything, right? But as far as the commentating and as far as the writing goes, those are both things that I never really thought about doing. And I would put up, Facebook posts after a fight, breaking down a fight or breaking down my opinion on a fight that was up and coming. And people would always tell me, dude, you should do some writing. And I would kind of just brush it off, and I had heard this from various people for a couple of years. And then finally I had a couple of people reach out to me, about writing for their sites. And then finally I relented, and I can't write about something unless I can't write just to write. I can never be a writer that writes a piece once a week. That's never going to be me. I can only write when inspired to do so. There has to be a little bit of passion behind it. And when Manny Pacquiao beat Pete Thurman, and he was 40 years old at that point, and a major underdog in that fight, I was, wow, this is insane. I should write something about this. I should do my first article about this. So that was actually my very first article, was about when Manny Pacquiao overcame and beat Keith Thurman. And a majority of my articles would only be about when inspired to do so, which means that something dramatic has to take place, or even George Foreman's passing last year. When George Foreman passed away, he's a very influential person who's been there my whole life since I was a kid. He's always been on the TV in front of me, So his story, I couldn't condense it to just one, let's say 800-page story. It ended up being a 3-part story, So the writing, as far as the writing goes, yeah, it's something, when I do it, I do take it seriously. There's a lot of, it's not the writing that's the difficult part. It's the editing. It's the revision, because you're pulling things out, you're putting things in, you're finding the right words at the right places. It's the editing process. So after you write, that's what's going to take a while. That's the big part of it. And as far as the commentating goes, it's kind of the same deal. I've had people tell me over the years, you speak pretty well, or you're pretty knowledgeable about boxing, you'd be really good on the mic. And I had people tell me that over the years. And then Eric Bentley, who's a friend of mine, he used to be the COO for Real Deal Promotions, and he used to be actually worked at the New York State Athletic Commission. That's how I originally met him. They were doing a show. They had a show coming up, and he asked me about commentating. He's like, "I want to give you a shot on the mic and see how you like it." So, I did a show for them at King's Theater in Brooklyn. And then he brought me back like a couple of months later. So I started commentating for them. And unfortunately, Real Deal had a lot of internal problems. And then they ended up folding after like a year. So I only got to commentate for them a few times, because they had a really good team together. Dave Diamante was their ring announcer. They had a good commentating team. They had some good fighters signed. They had Edgar Berlanga. They had Alicia Baumgartner. They had all these fighters signed before they were even known, and they were just prospects on their way up. So they had a good roster of fighters and everything. They were doing shows all over the country. Actually, they were doing Atlantic City. They were doing Kentucky. They were doing shows in Brooklyn at King's Theater. So they were doing shows all over. I think that they were just doing a little bit too fast, too soon within the first year of promotion, and then there was some internal issues which I couldn't get into because it's not my business to state it. But that that was that, unfortunately. So I've gotten commentating gigs since then. But not as often as I would like to. But to answer your question, and one of the questions that you asked is, yeah, there is preparation involved. Like if I'm going to commentate a show, the way I do it is I'll take a look. All right, I've got these 7 fights. So there's 14 fighters I got to take a peek at, and I'll just watch basically a round or 2 of each one, just so I can get an idea of what he likes, what he doesn't like, what he might do, what he definitely won't do. Just some of the indicators of how he fights as a fighter. Because just because you see him fight against a guy on video a certain way doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. But I can get an idea of what he likes and what he doesn't like, and what might be effective for him to attempt, and what might be effective for the other guy to attempt on him. So sometimes if you overanalyze, you overstudy, you can overanalyze to the point of knowing nothing. So I just watch a little bit of footage of each guy just to get familiar with them before I commentate.
I like that strategy. See, the thing that I would do, me personally, is I would look at, all right, so you got these 2 fighters. You look at their record, and a lot of these guys is tough because you'll look at, all right, this guy's like 27-0, he's undefeated, unanimous decision all the way around. So the way I would look at it is, all right, we look at the highlights, we look at like what he does, just like you said, but then I would go, all right, what was his like worst win, or what was his like what was this one loss, and you go into it and you see what happens. If they have a couple, you go into those 2 losses and you see if there's like a common pattern as far as like weaknesses, as far as like what the opponent can take advantage of. And when you look at the 2, you look at, all right, we've seen the weaknesses with this guy. Is this guy capable of doing that to this guy right here? Because that's me personally, the way I would look at it. So I do like going round by round, and I'm sure like when you got, and that's just one fight for me. I'm sure when you got 7 fights, 14 fighters, there's not a lot of time to go like, all right, we got to look at all 14 of these guys and do the same exact thing. Because for me, something like that takes like an hour and a half of like writing notes.
Do preparation whatsoever. They're just naturals, and they just, they can just. I have to feel like I did some preparation, and that kind of correlates towards my podcast as well. I mean, I'm not just going to pick a fight just to pick a fight, right? So, like we talked earlier about the Ball Figueroa fight tomorrow, right? So I studied footage on both guys, and I said to myself, well, what's going to be the most realistic way this fight's going to look? It's going to look a little bit. Maybe it could look a little bit like when Ball fought Vargas. Vargas is 5'10". It's going to look some similarities from a stylistic standpoint. That's what it's going to look like. So that was the fight that I was focusing on when I was getting ready for us to do our show and break down that fight and give my pick the other day. Is the Ray Vargas fight, because Ray Vargas is 5'10". Ball's 5'2". Figueroa is 5'9". So there's a lot of similarities there. So yeah, just you get an indicator on how this fight might play out, what Ball is going to try and implement, and what he's going to avoid.
Before we get to the next topic, let's talk about David Diamante real quick, because I'm gonna let you know like what my first impressions were of David Diamante when he started doing all the DAZN stuff. Because for me, when I would look at boxing, the two guys that we would look at, me and most famously, you look at like Michael Buffer. Michael Buffer was that big guy. That was the one. And then you look at like Jimmy Lennon Jr., those types of guys right there. When David Diamante started with DAZN, I'm looking and I'm like, who's this dude with the crazy hair? I'm like I didn't know too much about David Diamante. I was like, where'd they find this guy? Eventually, as DAZN started turning themselves into the #1 platform for boxing, you start seeing David Diamante so many times, and you're looking and you're like, David Diamante, like, he's doing great work. He could potentially have that type of legacy that a Jimmy Lennon Jr. or like a Michael Buffer has. You go way back with him even before he hit like the mainstream. So talk about, did you see like this type of rise from David Diamante? Like, you knew he was probably talented and everything like that, but did you see him potentially getting this rise when he got on DAZN? Did you see him becoming as big as he is now?
Let's first and foremost, I'm very happy for him because he's a great guy. I met him back probably about 2010, I would say. Second time I fought at Madison Square Garden, he was the ring announcer, and he probably did 5 or 6 of my fights throughout my career. He was one of the local New York guys. So there was him. There was another guy, Joe Antonacci, and I'm forgetting who else. But those were your local like New York ring announcers. And he climbed the ladder pretty quick. He started getting himself on TV. He was a hustler, and Dave's a grinder. And then once he got this deal with actually before he got the deal with DAZN, he got a deal with the Brooklyn Nets. So he was the official voice of the Nets for the Brooklyn Nets at the Barclays Center for all their home games. So that was one of the big breaks for him. But Dave loved to travel. That's his biggest passion in life. So he was stuck and relegated to New York a certain amount of time per year because of the Nets. He's got to be in New York for all these games. So after a couple of years of doing that, I think he got a little bit tired of that and he wanted to have some freedom because it's affecting his personal life a bit. So once the DAZN thing started to come about, he went about it. I'm not now. It's probably been like 6 years with DAZN. He's probably been the voice of DAZN over there for about 6 years now. So I'm not remembering the intricate details of how he got the gig. I do know that he left a very good one that he had for the Brooklyn Nets and basically quit that job and got the job for DAZN. So I would say it worked out because this guy's everywhere. He's all over the world, and he's well liked and respected, and he's on everybody's TV. He's on my TV right now as these fights are on in Mexico.
Yeah, no, he's doing a great job. I didn't think, like, when I first saw him, I didn't think David Diamante was gonna be as big as he was. And it's kind of like, don't judge a book by its cover, because I was like, this is like a unique looking guy right here. Like, we don't see, like, usually you see like the Michael Buffers, like the Jimmy Lennons, like they're all dapper, like, they all look like fancy, kind of like. When I saw David Diamante, I was like, this is kind of different. And then once you started seeing like all the pay-per-views on DAZN, you start looking at David Diamante being that main guy. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to hype up a crowd. I could definitely see him, having that type of legacy as like time goes by, 10, 20 years if he decides to do it. But it sounds like a dream job for him if he loves to travel because, I mean, you think about the ring, Saudi Arabia, you think about all these fights. I mean, he's going everywhere. So, but.
Yeah, Dave has a huge passion for boxing. He's very knowledgeable about boxing. Has a lot of great relationships in the industry. I mean, everybody that meets Dave Diamante likes Dave Diamante.
Oh yeah, 1000%. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, you talked about it like a little bit, but the other question I had for you was, out of your entire like boxing career, is there anything that you look back on that like you would have done differently as far as like a specific aspect, whether that's like how you prepared it, like mentally, physically, financially, anything like that? If you were to go back and look at your career, would you look at like, would there be a certain aspect that you look at and you're like, man, if I really like handled it this way, maybe things would have gone like a little bit different, a little bit better? Is there anything that you look at?
Good thing. And I wouldn't have turned pro at 26. I mean, I would have probably got started around 23 years old. I would have had an extra 3 years of my career. And by the time, by the time I started boxing at 17, that's why I said I wish I started boxing at 8, 9 years old. Even if it wasn't sparring, if I was just going to the gym and training, you don't necessarily have to be hit to have discipline in your life and a passion and a purpose, right? By the time I started boxing at 17 years old, I was already, drinking on a regular basis, smoking cigarettes, experimenting with drugs. I already had afflictions. So I just would go to the gym and train my ass off and, spar. And I'd come home and I'd go right out with the boys and go drinking and having fun and do my So there's no discipline whatsoever in the amateurs, which I cleaned up a lot in the pros. But even at that, it took me a very long time to clean it up, which is why I didn't turn pro until I was 26. So, yeah, I mean, of course, I wish I turned pro a couple of years earlier. And then stylistically, I was a southpaw. I was a slick southpaw. I like to fight guys at medium range and long range. And even if you were 5'10", I could outbox most guys, even if I was giving up height and reach. But I will admit that the weakest part of my game was my inside game. I didn't like to fight on the inside because I usually didn't have to fight on the inside. So no different than basketball, right? You got a guy that's a guy like Michael Jordan. You got to be able to play from all ranges. You got to be able to fight from all ranges. So if you give Michael Jordan the ball, he could drive to the basket or walk you down in the paint. He could shoot for a 15-foot jump, or he could hit a 3-pointer. He could score on you from any part of the court, right? Where if you bounce the ball in, you need Shaquille O'Neal has to be right under that hoop, and he's got to be in the paint to score. You give the ball to him from 15 feet away to shoot a jumper, he's not making it, and he's definitely not hitting a 3-pointer, right? So Shaq has to be within his comfort zone. Me, I had to be within my comfort zone to a degree. I wish that I did more inside fighting, because then I would have had a third thing to rely on. It wouldn't just have to be medium range and long range or using my legs and using the ring. I could have just got down and dirty on the inside and fought a little harder. So I think that would have helped out. I wish I would have focused on that a little bit.
And going back to what you said about like you starting at 17, I believe Regis Progress, he started at 17 as well. He started kind of late as well. But you look at like Regis, you see like a lot of the similar things that you talked about. You start seeing the decline, and you start seeing like how his game starts declining from there. From maybe not necessarily like make a weight or anything, but like the Regis Progress that I've seen from like this year or like the last 2 years, it's not the same one that I've seen when he was fighting Josh Taylor, competing for world titles, doing all those types of things. So, I mean, starting late, it definitely has like a huge impact as far as that. Now, overall, you got this podcast with Paulie Malignaggi. Paulie Malignaggi, he had a decent career in boxing himself, former world champion. So how did this Big Fight Forecast start? Because you guys know each other. You guys go way back. So how did this start? And like, what made you guys start the podcast at the time that you did?
It's funny. No different than the writing and the commentating. These things never were my idea. What happened is Paulie works for Pro Box. He has an exclusive contract with Pro Box. He's been with them 5-6 years now. So they used to do a lot of content outside of boxing, and the sports apps and sports gambling, as sports has gotten legalized in different states throughout the country, it's gotten very popular the last few years. So Paulie knows that I work overnights. I work for Hilton Hotel. I work overnights. So he knows not to call me at 8 o'clock in the morning. But my phone rang at like 8:30 in the morning, and I'm like, dude, what's up? And he's like, yo, sorry to bug you right now, but I'm driving. I'm with my producer, and we were trying to come up with some ideas for some new content, new material for the show. And then we started talking about boxing betting, because it's gotten very, very, very popular. By the way, as I'm telling the story, the picture that you got up of me like that is the Nassau Coliseum weighing when I was dead on the scale that I was talking about.
Oh, okay. Nice.
One of the worst pictures you could possibly use. That's me dead on the scale, about to be crucified the next day. But anyway,
bad.
All good. So he's just like, you're on speakerphone, talk to him, and I think that I told him that my friend is really good with the boxing bets, and that that you might be interested in doing something. So I'm like, all right, cool. So he puts me on with his producer, and he's like, Tommy, what's going on? It's just like Paulie says that you do really good with the boxing bets. He's just like, maybe we can put a little pilot together. And I'm like, yeah, all right, I'd be interested. So me, Paulie, Chris Algeria, Chris Algieri and Claudia. I forgot her last name. You know, the Spanish girl, Trey. I forget her name. She's all over the networks too. We did a pilot literally later on that day. So they were in the studio in Florida, and I zoomed in and we did our pilot. We broke down. It was a Diamante Davis pay-per-view that was coming up. We broke down 4 fights, and I nailed all 4 of them. And 3 of them I gave prop bets on. So I nailed it. And then I was supposed to do a show, and it was going to be supposed to be on Pro Box, and it was going to be a weekly show on Pro Box. And I don't want to get into all the details. They made me an offer. I accepted it, and then one thing led to another, or didn't lead to another, and it just didn't end up happening. So over the course of the next year or so, I probably had 3 or 4 different people approach me and said that we should do, me and you should do a podcast together, boxing and betting. And, these were all people that are friends in the industry, but I just wasn't into it, and I was still hoping that maybe Pro Box would come around because they did make me a good offer. So I was still kind of hoping for that, because that's already starting off with a leg up, because you have a well-known platform with a name out there, Pro Box, to get started. So, I kind of was just waiting around to see what happened. And Paulie had pitched it to me a couple of times. He said, well, me and you do your own thing. And I'm just like, yeah, maybe. And then one day I was at the gym last year, and, he had mentioned it again in passing. And I'm like, you know what? I keep turning down people for this, but you know what? Paulie's got a name. Paulie's got a following. Paulie's got a lot of followers on YouTube and Instagram and all these social media platforms. So, I kind of, got a foot in the door already. I'm just like, you know what? Yeah, fuck it, let's do it. So we started doing it, and now we've done 40 shows. So it's been fun. It's been cool. It's been getting a good following so far. And you know what? I probably wouldn't have done it with anybody else but him. Again, it was originally his idea. He was the one that was trying to get me on Pro Box to do this as a weekly show, and we filmed the pilot. So he's the first one to bring it up to me. So after all these once that didn't work out, once all these other people pitched it to me, I was kind of like, yeah, we'll see. I'm just kind of waiting, and we'll see what happens. Then he brought it up to me for probably the 3rd or 4th time. Me and him doing our own thing, and then finally one day, it just, like, you know what? I kind of got turned on by the idea. I'm like, you know what? That is a good idea. Let's do it. Let's do this tomorrow. And we got right on it.
I think it's the importance of like finding like the perfect person to do it with, because you got to think about like you said, like you hit all 4 prop bets. And again, no disrespect to like Chris Algieri and them, but you felt like you needed to do it with like a specific person. Like you needed to have that like chemistry with that person. And you tried it with Paulie Malignaggi and you clicked there right there. And like you said, you don't think that like you would be able to do it with anybody else because of the chemistry that you guys have when you're doing the podcast. So I feel like that's definitely important. Now, the other thing I wanted to go to, kind of getting like a little personal, but you talked about David Diamante, like loving to travel. You love to travel as well. And I wanted to ask you about like the love of traveling. Was it always something that like you had as a kid, like, or was it something like you got into boxing and you were able to travel to like all these different places and you built a love for traveling off of that? Did you always have a love for traveling, or was it something that was developed through boxing?
No, it actually had nothing to do with boxing. It actually has to do with when I was in boxing. So as I told you, I stopped boxing when I was 23 years old. I boxed amateur from 17 to 23. And then I took that 3-year break and I did my thing before coming back to the sport and starting from scratch again, and then eventually turning pro a few months later. But I had gotten my first apartment with my buddy Mike, and then we just started doing road trips to different places, to Boston, to Virginia, to different places, and then started traveling a little bit, going to Cancun, going to Dominican Republic, went to Miami for the first time, and I just developed a passion for traveling a little late in life. I was about 23 when I really developed a passion for traveling, and now I'm fully invested. Now that'll be there for the rest of my life. I still feel, of all the places I've been to, I think I've been to 18 countries, been to probably 31, 32 states. I couldn't tell you how many cities and all these places. I've pretty much been to all these places multiple times, and I feel like I haven't even scratched the surface yet. But yeah, I love traveling. That's all I think about.
All right, you said 18 countries. You got a whole, let's see, it's about over 200 countries in the entire world. Yeah, you got a good 180 to go, man.
Well, there's money I really am not interested in going to, of course, but I do
Oh
have.
yeah, for sure.
And
I also want to talk about family influence on your career. So like if you look on your social media, again, like you're open when it comes to family, you know, and a lot of these times when you go on vacation, it's like a big family group. It's not like anything like intermediate, like, oh, it's just like me and the wife or whatever. A lot of these times you go on these vacations, what I've noticed is it's like a big family, you know, it's brothers and cousins and all these types of things. Talk about like your family's influence on like your boxing career and like as far as like the family influence after you retired.
I'll tell you, as far as my actual boxing career goes, I mean, my father was a huge fan of my career. Um, Amateur and pro, came to all of my fights. Was very proud of what I did in the ring. And before that, my grandfather, who I was named after, Thomas Rainone, he was a big boxing fan. So growing up, he was. I would go to his house in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and that's where we watched like all the pay-per-view fights. That's where I watched Foreman Holyfield. That's where I watched Tyson Ruddock 1 and 2. I watched a lot of the big fights there because it was just a social gathering. So when I would go there, maybe like once a month, I would go for a weekend, and oftentimes it would be fight weekend. So my uncle Sal, he lived in the basement. He'd have friends over, and we'd all watch the fights in the basement. So, you know, boxing used to be a lot bigger than it is today. Of course, I think in a weird way, all sports were bigger at one point in the past than they are today. I think all sports are kind of watered down. There's just too many options out there, Um, so yeah, boxing was very big in the early '90s. So as far as family goes, I mean, I don't have anybody in my family that's really big into boxing. My father does watch boxing still. Um, my cousin Tommy, he was always big into boxing. But besides that, I didn't really have a family that was big on boxing. My parents divorced when I was 3 years old, so I got my family on Long Island, and then I had all my family in Brooklyn. My father's side, everybody's in Brooklyn. My mother's side, everybody's on Long Island. The Long Island side, nobody was really into boxing at all. The Brooklyn side, yeah, my father was into it. My uncle a little bit, and then my cousin Tommy, and my grandfather, of course.
So I'm sure they're all happy to like, you know, like after you retired, I'm sure they're all happy that like, you know, you're home now and you're able to like go and like enjoy life instead of like the dedication that you had to boxing, the discipline. I'm sure they're glad that you're able to do all these types of things, go travel everywhere now, considering you're not boxing no more.
Yeah, I mean, it frees things up for me for sure. I mean, yeah, listen, any which way you're going to miss out. I mean, boxing is very demanding. You got to keep yourself in great shape. Even to this day, listen, my last fight was 2018. Right before I got on the interview with you, I just got out of the shower. I just ran 3 miles. I still have to work out. Like I have to work out on a regular basis, so I just don't feel like me, and that'll be me for the rest of my life. Now, am I ever going to train the way I did while I was fighting? No, the motivation is gone. I'll be out there running, and I'm like, I'll tell myself like I'm going to go run 5 miles tomorrow. No, no, I'm not. Why? I'm not fighting. I'm not making weight. 2.5 miles is more than enough. Like that's it. I'm gonna go to the gym. But I still got to work out. I still got to put in the effort. And it's also just it's the muscle memory of doing this since I'm 17 years old. I've been doing this forever. I feel like So even tomorrow morning, like I have a client. I do personal training too. So I have a client in the morning. So I'll go train him. But as soon as I'm done training him, I got to do my own workout. I'm already in the gym, so I'm gonna put in my own work.
Oh yeah, that's what I love about boxing too. It's like you never some guys, you know, they go completely off of it, but like you can tell, like a lot of guys who don't train, you can tell that like after boxing they don't train. Like you could see the drastic change. Like the one I look at is like Prince Ahmed. Prince Ahmed is the big one that I look at. Like, you know, you don't train.
World champion, 140 pounds, but he
Yeah,
McGregor 4250, and he blew up
yeah.
quick. But
Oh yeah.
but also, you know what it is. Also, the reason I remember Buddy McGirt in an interview said, like, listen, the reason why I'm fat is because I don't want to train because it'll give me the urge to start boxing again. It'll give me the itch. Buddy McGirt, for all the fights that he had, he did retire relatively early, but he also boxed his entire life. I think Buddy might have retired as early as like 32 or 33, which is pretty young considering.
Yeah, I remember before Mike Tyson like came back and started doing the exhibitions, he said the same thing on Joe Rogan. He said like I'll do the treadmill. He goes, but I don't even want to watch it. He goes, 'cause I know I'm gonna get that urge back. Well, sure enough, he got that urge back. He went to the ring a couple more times. Now, with all that being said, I want to get to like a more quicker type question or anything like that. I want people to kind of know you a little bit more personally, but I want to do it really quick. This is the rapid fire. Now, usually I time everybody. I time everybody on the rapid fire. So the whole point is just answer it as quick as you possibly can. I got some questions over here, and overall, just answer them the best you can. Answer them as quick as you possibly can. You ready?
Oh,
And we're gonna start now. Favorite food?
ravioli.
Favorite movie or TV show?
Movie, The Departed.
Okay. Dream vacation.
Vacation, I'm going to go off the top of my head, Hawaii and Australia.
Okay. Favorite genre of music.
Rock and roll.
If you had to pick one animal that best describes you, what would it be and why?
Dog. Love them. And I don't know what it has to do with me. I just love dogs, period.
All right. If you had to pick one superpower, what would it be?
Ooh, I guess flight.
Okay. Um, Favorite hobby outside of the sport.
Traveling.
Okay. And then who's your role model and why?
My role model is my grandfather, who I was named after. My poppy is what I called him. Just an incredible person, incredible influence, incredibly positive person in my life. Like he was my God. So he passed away in 2009, and then my grandmother a couple of years later. But they were very, very important people in my life.
You got 1:06. Now that's actually like last place out of like the two people that I've interviewed. But overall, I feel like it was the best answer, the role model one that got you like 10 seconds. But if there was one that you were gonna take like a long time for, it would definitely be that one for sure. Now, before we leave, just one more quick thing. Usually I would tell a lot of my guests, what I want you to do, like look right in the camera. And if you had to give just one final piece of advice, it could be life, the sport, regardless of what it is. If you just had to give one final piece of advice, what would it be?
Well, listen, it translates a lot of times. The sport of boxing translates to life, right? So there's an expression: "Old too soon, wise too late," and that expression started to make sense to me when I was coming upon the time that it was time to wrap it up in boxing, right? Like you think it's never going to end, but it's going to end. No different than life. And there's also another expression out there that athletes die twice. Once when their career ends, and then once like everybody else. And that's also true. Like it was rough when I first stopped fighting. I had like it was a big part of my identity. I didn't know what to do with myself, and both things are true. So at the end of the day, you got to take every day. Do not take anything for granted. You got to take every day as a gift and make it count. Don't postpone for tomorrow what you can do today, whether it's traveling, whether it's going to see a friend, whether it's going to see a relative, whether it's going out to dinner with your brother or sister, or whatever it is, just grab life and do it because you know what? It might not be there tomorrow.
I love that. Before we wrap up, if there's any shout outs that you want to give, social medias, platforms, anything like that, feel free to give them out, man.
Yeah, well, the YouTube channel is Tommy and Paulie's Big Fight Forecast. You can find me under Tommy Rainone on Instagram or Facebook, and then we got our Big Fight Forecast Instagram page as well. And yeah, that's it. We're on. My brother runs a lot of my stuff. He has us on Spotify, but there's all these other platforms that I got to eventually just like, this show is basically just we've been rushing it and putting it together each week, but I got to get on it a little more where I can get it on different platforms because I know that there's a bunch of different ones out there that we can get on for free. So I'm gonna get a hold of him tomorrow. I'm going by his house anyway. And I'm gonna see what other ones he can get us on because right now it's just on YouTube and Spotify. So I think we could reach more people. But that's the main thing right now is just the YouTube channel.
Awesome, Tommy. I appreciate you coming on to the podcast. Again, a very insightful interview. Definitely learned a lot. Definitely things I could take into like the future when some of these events pop up and all those types of things. So I really do appreciate you hopping onto the pod, man.
Absolutely, anytime.
And with all that being said, make sure y'all continue to tune into the Puncher's Point. Make sure y'all continue to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure y'all continue to follow and subscribe to the podcast platforms and social medias. We got a bunch of new content coming up. And last but not least, if y'all love this, make sure you leave a like, comment, subscribe, share it, and make sure y'all stay on point with the Puncher's Point.